Hello everyone, this is your Professor Gabriel Said Reynolds. I'm speaking to you from my office here at the University of Notre Dame. As I mentioned in the opening video, I teach Islamic studies and theology here. Of course, my special focus is the Quran. And the special focus of my life these days is our MOOC, which I'm enjoying immensely, especially being able to see all of your comments and questions that you've been posting on the forum. Otherwise, these days, I'm teaching my courses here at the University of Notre Dame. I'm coaching a youth soccer team, and I'm working on a big book on the Quran and the Bible. Speaking of books, I just wanted to mention that you have the opportunity, this may sound like shameless self-promotion, but you have the opportunity to buy my textbook, Emergence of the Quran. There's some readings or some selections of that textbook integrated into the edX platform for our course, but you can buy the entire book for a ridiculously cheap price, for only $9.99. There's a link to that through the syllabus to the website where you get the book for $9.99. It usually costs $35. So I wanted to mention that. Friends, the main point here is this is the first of my weekly videos. Every week I'll be recording a short video to comment on some of the discussions that are going on inside of the forums, and also to preview what's going to happen in the upcoming week. Before I get into some of the discussions in the forum and some of my reaction to those things, I just wanted to mention how excited I am about this course. Friends, we are over 7,500 students in this course, and you come from 152 countries. Actually, that number is growing. As of now, it's 152 countries. We are truly a global community, and that is very special. I'm proud and honored to be a part of it. And I hope that in the end, you'll find this to be a worthwhile experience. I'd like to go over a few basic sort of suggestions for a way of promoting advancing a fruitful and positive conversation on our forums. The most important point I can make is it's very important to remember that we're an academic course. So all points of view are welcome, but the center of our conversation will always be, what are academic scholars saying about the Quran? So that's important to keep in mind. It's important that we sort of stay on focus, that we deal with the topics that are being addressed by the course. And it's also important that everyone in the course be ready to hear different views. Our views must be expressed respectfully, but there are going to be a diversity of views, so we should be prepared for that. Whatever our personal background is, whether that's intellectually or religiously or otherwise, we should be ready to hear those views. Also, a few pointers. If you keep your points really close to what's going on in the course and really close to the readings and videos, you'll find it'll be much easier for our TAs to be able to comment on them, and you'll get more feedback, I think. So that's one suggestion. Also, if you have a question, not a comment, but a question for the forum, you can mark that through the edX platform. Just sort of hit question there, and you'll be sure to get a response to that. Also, if you can follow the threads, this is sort of the final practical point. If you can follow the threads, that'll be really helpful. Once a conversation gets going, it's nice to be able to interact with others. So instead of starting a new discussion, try to follow the thread of a conversation that's already begun. Okay, so friends, I'd like to comment really on two issues that have come up in the forum, and then do a little bit of previewing of the upcoming week. Issue number one is really connected to the basic methodology of this course, namely that we're looking at the Quran as a unit, or as a unitary composition. And what I mean in particular by saying this is that we're not following a chronological approach to the Quran. Now, many scholars, both traditional Muslim scholars and Western academic scholars, have followed the notion that the Quran can be sort of dissected, sort of taken apart, and put back together in a chronological order, beginning, according to tradition, with Quran chapter 96, Surah Al-Alaq, which is understood by tradition to be the first surah that was revealed to the Prophet, and ending, there are different theories, with Quran 5 or Quran 9, Surah Al-Ma'idah or Surah At-Tawbah. And along the way, all of, sort of like, as I think I mentioned in the video, almost like a puzzle, these pieces, these surahs, can be placed together in some sort of chronological order in which they were given or proclaimed by the Prophet. Tradition, of course, would say, given to the Prophet by God through the angel Gabriel. Now, in this course, we're not going to follow this approach. We're going to look at the Quran in its final composition as a unified book. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, we find that in Islamic tradition, there's actually quite a number of diverse views over the precise order, chronological order of the text. Number two, Western scholars who follow the chronological order themselves have many sort of disputes about that. And I can give a couple of examples. One I think I mentioned in the lecture. Quran chapter 110 seems in terms of its structure, form, and appearance to be something like the early surahs, those shorter surahs at the end of the Quran. But because of a story that Muslim scholars in the medieval period tell about Quran 110, which is that it was revealed towards the end of the Prophet's life, the chapter incidentally is called Surat al-Nasr, which means the chapter of victory, help, or victory, triumph, and it's understood to be a period in which many people were entering Islam at the end of the Prophet's career. So we have a story which sort of places it at the end of the Prophet's career in Medina, but the appearance of the Quran, or of this surah of the Quran, gives us the notion that it comes from the beginning, the Meccan period. So Western scholars really debate, should we make this Meccan or Medinan? That's one example. There are many surahs like this. There's also the opposite example, surahs which traditionally are classified as Meccan, but which are understood based on some of their content to maybe reflect a later period of the Prophet's career. This is the case with Quran chapter 18, Surah Al-Kahf, which has a lot of material that seems to be related to Christian legends, the story of the sleepers of Ephesus, which in chapter 18 is the companions of the cave, or a story connected to Alexander the Great. Chapter 19 is another example, understood to be Meccan, but it seems to have lots of material here, in this case, again dealing with Christian tradition, in this case, the birth of Christ. And tradition tells us that in Mecca there shouldn't have been many Christians around, so the Quran wouldn't be interested in telling Christian-related stories or accounts. Therefore, some Western scholars say, well, maybe we should place this material later. Maybe it was later inserted. Anyway, there's a lot of confusion among Western scholars about where to place certain surahs. Finally, and maybe most importantly, there's reasons to look at the Quran as a unity because scholars have more fundamental doubts about the sorts of stories that are used in Islamic tradition to locate a particular passage at a particular moment of the Prophet's life. There's going to be a lecture dedicated specifically to this, and so I won't go into it in detail. But there can also be sort of profit or a lot to be gained by looking at the Quran as a unitary structure. After all, it is a text. This is the form that it's come down to us. And so we can be really interested in the relationship of interior parts of the text with other parts of the text without having to say, well, this part was earlier, this part was later. As much as we're doing a literary study of the text, we're interested in its literary features. And by looking at it as a unity, we're able to appreciate questions of structure and format of the Quran. And in this way, we're able to sort of do honor to the text in its final composed form. Let me say something about one other topic which came up. Here I'll say a bit less, which is questions of comparing the structure of the Quran to the structure of the Hebrew Bible. I guess it's just really important to emphasize how different these books are. The Hebrew Bible is a collection of different books written over centuries, and each of the books tends to be focused on a particular historical moment, or with books like the Proverbs or Psalms, tends to be a collection of a similar genre of literature. So it's a very diverse book. It's also very much meant to tell the history of one particular people, the history of Israel, and God's relationship with Israel. The Quran, of course, is structured fundamentally different. As I mentioned in the lecture, it seems to be structured for the purpose of public recitation. The surahs don't go topic by topic. They don't go historically. They don't advance historically. But they seem to be organized by length so that a certain surah of a certain length could be recited publicly at a certain moment when it was deemed appropriate. Finally, friends, I'd like to look ahead to week number 2. It's going to be terrific. There are lots of interesting things as we move from questions of the structure of the Quran to the question of the themes of the Quran. Actually, the first lecture you're going to see me speaking to you from next to the shores of the Dead Sea, where we're speaking about punishment stories. In fact, the first 3 lectures, the first 3 videos, all have to do with the question of different ways in which the Quran means to convince its audience of its fundamental claim that its audience should believe in God and should believe in its messenger, should affirm that its messenger has received a message from God. And the Quran makes these arguments by doing things like telling stories of the fate of earlier peoples who rejected other messengers, or by telling stories about heaven or hell, and we're going to see some other topics as well. So we're really going to get to the heart of the notion of the Quran as argument, a book with an argument, which is something very distinctive. Friends, I've enjoyed it thus far. I've loved getting to see some of your comments and input on the forum. and I look forward to moving ahead on this journey as we discover together the Quran, the sacred text of Muslims. Thank you.